Alright, so we're going to start with a nice batch of Criterions I picked up from a wonderful group seller from the Laserdisc Forever Facebook group. And we'll just go in spine order. This has some that I've been after for a very, very long time. So this is spine number 8. This is the Criterion Special Edition release of The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the immortal 1956 classic directed by Don Siegel that's based on the novel The Body Snatchers and has been remade innumerable times, none of which really, I think, stand up to this one. Of course, they each have their own individual strengths and some have their fans, but for me, this and a good number of other people, this one really kind of stands on its own. It's really kind of an oddball, and being, from a lower budgeted studio, it was really kind of had the odds stacked against it, and it really, really works, no matter if you read into it as a parable about the fear of anti-communism during the Red Scare and the witch hunts, or if you just look at it as a warning against conformity in the 1950s and a societal commentary in that way. There's many different levels you can read into it but it's just one of those films that doesn't really date, doesn't lose its impact, and if you've never seen it, see it. Anyway, this Criterion edition was really the first truly good video release this film had, and of course there was an earlier silver label version, so this really updates it with digital sound and with a really nice exclusive commentary track. It is letterbox. This film did have the Super Scope process applied to it. Unfortunately, this film was pretty much designed to be shown in a flat widescreen, and when Super Scope was applied, it's actually a negative blow-up process. It literally stretches out the frame to more of a 2.0 to 1 shape. Films that had done properly are, for example, would be like Veracruz from 1954. However, this one was not designed for it, and so there is a noticeable stretching distortion effect if you get really nerdy and you look at it very closely, or if you just wonder why it always kind of look weird, that's why. And unfortunately, the original negative, no one knows where it is, so all we have is this Super Scope version. There are apparently a couple 16mm prints and trailers floating around that are in the full 133 camera aperture, and unfortunately all the 133 video transfers out there are just pan and scans of the Super Scope version. So unfortunately, for the time being, that's what we're stuck with. This is a really nice transfer for the Laserdisc era, and the gatefold is really, really nice. It uses original lobby door and newsprint materials, showing off the different ways this film was marketed, and all are really, really striking. Very, very 50s sci-fi-esque, but you can notice there is a bit of a difference to it. There's definitely an attempt to get across the desperation of the characters in the film, I think. And I really like the way this gatefold is done. It keeps with the sort of dark green-ish background color of the main cover, and it really, really works. I'm just very happy to finally pick this one up. Usually you come across the CLV version without the commentary and supplemental section, but this one, it's just really nice to have. Again, it does have a nice exclusive commentary, and you get the usual little Criterion supplemental section with some stills and text slides of information. A really nice essay here, and a digital mono track. It was said that when Paramount put out the new restoration that they had done a couple years back on this new Olive Signature Blu-ray reissue that you can pick up, and I highly recommend you do so, that Paramount found and restored the original Perspecta audio mix. Perspecta, of course, was a process for trying to give a stereo surround effect to what would normally be mono. It would be fed through a control unit in the theater. And so essentially you'd have a sort of 2 or 3 channel stereo spread with some surround ishness via some speakers in the back, and it would kind of spread around. Some were mixed better than others. There are some really good Perspecta audio mixes, and there are some really bad Perspecta audio mixes. Unfortunately, none of this has really made it to home video, and the few times where it really has, or it's been labeled as being from a Perspecta audio source, it's really not done very well because Perspecta is very finicky and you have to have the specific old decoders. So it's really kind of a shame that that's still apparently on a shelf somewhere, but it is out there. As I said, Olive put out their new signature Blu-ray with some really nice new extras, and then a bunch of extras that had been made for a DVD special edition that never happened. So they had been sitting on a shelf for like, 10, 15 years. So I highly recommend picking up the Olive signature version and supplementing it with this Criterion release for the specific Criterion commentary, and for having, a really nice Laserdisc edition. Later on, Republic Video took back over the film rights, and they did their own transfer. I think it's pretty much from the same element, but I haven't seen their Laserdisc. It's also got a tiny little television interview that's on the DVD, and it's also on the Blu-ray. The first Republic DVD is a port of the Laserdisc, so if you've seen the DVD, you've pretty much seen the Laserdisc, but you'll want to track down this Criterion for all the exclusive extras and the commentary. So really, really nice release, and I'd argue it's probably the best one on Laserdisc. Next up, we have spine number 10A. This is the CLV reissue of The Seventh Seal, the cinematic landmark, directed, of course, by Ingmar Bergman. Beautiful image used for the standard-looking Criterion cover. I love the usage of black and gray, and I don't know if I would have gone with this light aqua, but it does work. But this is just a perfect cover, and a perfect frame choice for their still style cover of this time period. This, of course, is the CLV version. You can get the CAV version with the same artwork. But the reason why I wanted to pick up this CLV version is not only is it one of those where the CAV doesn't have digital sound and the CLV does, but this is one of the few CLVs that actually retains the audio commentary from the CAV version. Neither of these are super common, but this is one of those CLVs with digital sound and commentary that are super rare, kind of like the CLV reissue of Magnificent Ambersons, where the CAV was analog only and had a bunch of extras, and the CLV, they apparently didn't press very many of them, and it retains the commentary and adds digital sound. So it's one of those weird Criterion transitional discs that actually is pretty important because it has digital sound and commentary. So it's pretty much a slimmed down version of the CAV set. You get a lovely essay. Again, the gray with text and then the aqua bars, it really looks nice to the eyes, especially when you're holding in your hands. And again, one of the most iconic moments from the film, playing chess with Death himself, just absolutely beautiful. And this is, pretty much the version to own on Laserdisc, I would argue. You can go out and track down the CAV version if you're really, really into it. But this CLV version has the digital mono. And of course, with some of these films, you have to check between all the various different releases to see which one has the best audio track. So I'm planning to do that at some point. I'd like to. I haven't gone in and gotten the big Bergman Criterion box set yet, although I'd really like to. They just released a gigantic Bergman anniversary box set with all of the previously released Blu-rays they put out and some other new ones of some brand new restorations. So I'm just very excited to finally have this one. This is one of those weird transitional discs that you have to specifically go out and track down the CLV version. And like I said, it's very uncommon. So happy to add this one finally. Sometimes you just don't have the room for another CAV box set. So then you go and get the CAV box set to be alongside one of those CLV discs with digital mono because you're a crazy person. So here we have spine number 45. This is the North by Northwest CAV box set. And as I said before, I got this to go along with the CLV set, CLV release, which adds digital mono but doesn't have all of the supplements of this release. And I really like the transfer on that disc, so I was interested to see what the CAV version looked like. This has a little bit of corner wear, as most of these Criterion boxes are going to do, so I can live with that. And this was a really great bundle of some Criterions I've been looking for a long time, so I don't mind some dings on some of these boxes. Again, same artwork as the CLV, sort of a artist rendering of one of the famous, the famous climax of the crop duster chase, but they've mixed in elements from different parts of the scene. And of course, the CLV version uses this for the whole cover. I like the usage of blue and yellow, although I don't know if I would have used the exact color combination, but it works, I think. Let me show you the rear. Well, first let me show you the insert. This is one of the few Criterion boxes that's actually got a hinge. It's not just a lift top box. So here is the Criterion letter insert, talking about that they used MGM's archival negative and matted it to 1:85:1 because VistaVision has variable ratios you can use for projection and matting. You can go from anywhere between 1.66 all the way up to 2.0, and you should not be able to lose too much image quality no matter which ratio you use. And North by Northwest is kind of varied in what's been presented on video over the years. Again, this does have the original mono mix, which is not on anything past the Laserdisc. Starting the DVD era, there's a 5.1 remix that I think really harms some of the dialogue and is not what was intended in 1959. And unfortunately, the mono mix has not been replaced ever since. And at least there's no replaced effects in the 5.1, but it does kind of overpower some of the scenes. So that's another reason why you need to go and pick up North by Northwest on Criterion or the MGM Laserdisc, because that way you can actually hear the film as it was intended to be heard. Now here you get the typical Criterion rear with a really nice essay, of course presented in Videoscope. You have the North by Northwest supplement, which is pretty nice and pretty lengthy. And then you get a nice section on Hitchcock. All of these are, of course, not on the CLV version. It's pretty nicely spread across. Yeah, it makes it onto the 5th side because of the CAV encoding, and then side 5 and 6 are your special features. So again, it's a bit more than most. So the box is pretty nice, even though it doesn't have PCM mono. That's the one real downside. That's why I'd say also pick up the CLV one. And do note that the MGM version is a new transfer from the same element. It's got slightly different color timing. The aspect ratio is a bit different. And like they did with Goldfinger back in the day, they've replaced the opening title music with a clean stereo soundtrack master source. And then the rest of the film's mono. So that is another difference. So if you want the original mono mix for North by Northwest, with the opening titles with Bernard Herrmann's famous main title cue in the original mono, you will have to pick up the Criterion. That is exclusive to the Criterion version, along with their transfer and the extras. So a really nice set, very important. I just wish it had digital mono so it was perfect all around. Next up is spine number 57. This is the Criterion release of Passive Glory, one of those life-changing films that everybody has to see at some point. Beautiful imagery, although again the color choice at first seems kind of weird, going for the light gray and with blue background bars, but again, once you look at it for a minute and it's actually in your hands, it starts to work, and I think it does work. It kind of matches the Criterion Killing Jacket, and like the Killing Jacket, it has a kind of nice gloss to it, so it looks and feels really nice, very sturdy. Of course, gorgeous imagery of Dax walking down and through no man's land in the trenches. If you've never seen this film, stop whatever you're doing and go see it, and then come back. Trust me, you'll feel a lot better. Well, maybe not feel a lot better because it's kind of a downer for a movie based on a true story. But anyway, it's just one of those important artworks that everyone has to see at some point. This does have a digital PCM mono track, which I didn't realize for the longest time. I thought this is one of those I really wasn't going to have to pick up because it didn't have digital audio, but it does. It does have the original trailer, but that's the only special feature. So this was, like The Killing, a movie-only release. It has a really nice essay here, and uncommon for one of these, it does have stills across the entire bottom. I guess they didn't want to have as much dead space on the bottom, so that is nice. Of course, it's licensed from MGM, and then they pretty much used this same element to make the first DVD. They never did a Laserdisc of their own in this country. I think there's maybe one in Japan a couple years later in the 90s, but it's probably pretty similar to this Criterion version. So of course, this is in 1:3:3, as was the DVD, and it wasn't until the restored, cleaned up version premiered in theaters and art houses and then came out on the Criterion Blu-ray that it was presented in 1:6:6:1, and that's how you see it now. There's still a bit of debate. It's not as much as some of the later films on whether The Killing and Paths of Glory were supposed to be shown widescreen or if they were supposed to be shown in matted 166 or 185, as the latter would probably how they were shown here in the States back in the day. Of course, this was just after the transitional period to widescreen, and Kubrick was still kind of working as, I mean, he wasn't independent because these were technically United Artists films, but United Artists was still a very hands-off entity, and so you go make your film, and then it would go be exhibited in the standard methods. So they probably were designed and shown widescreen, but I'm sure Kubrick protected for the 133, which he did much prefer due to the verticality being much greater, and that being very important to the photographic style of these films. And of course, now that we only have the widescreen versions, now it's the 133 versions of both that are rare and not available. So that makes this kind of important in a way, because the 133 version has not been presented anywhere else, and does have a PCM mono track, so this is really the only version to go for on Laserdisc. Unfortunately, it's just not a special edition and doesn't have anything besides the trailer, but still a nice release to pick up. I should have picked it up a long time ago. I just didn't realize it had a PCM track. Next up is Criterion number 59. This is one I've been after for a very, very long time. Pretty much ever since I got into Laserdisc, I've been trying to find this Criterion 50th Anniversary Edition of The Wizard of Oz. This is the full special edition that still has some exclusive features that aren't on later versions. Of course, they fit it into their style of the time period with a background color and Criterion banner and then a specific still. It has the same style as The Adventures of Robin Hood with the Anniversary Edition logo. Well, text underneath the photo, but if you notice, they've actually made the background the yellow brick road itself, so that's a nice touch, and it's a nice check from Criterion that still fits in their style. What's interesting to note about this is a vintage still that does seemingly have Technicolor hues, and the importance of this disc was always that it's supposed to use a 3-strip Technicolor element from MGM's vault, and is presumably what was also used on the later MGM transfers before the big Ultimate Oz box set, when they did a new master and new audio work and new extras and such. So let me show you the gatefold. It does come with the Criterion insert, so I'll show that in a second. This is a really well done Criterion gatefold. I really like that they've had the still printed in black and white and then simply colored the ruby slippers in. That's a really nice touch. And the text here is a little blurb about key cast and crew personnel from the producer, director, and associate producers onto the cast on the other panels. I'll show you those. And they just loaded it with as many people as they could cram in here. So really, really well done, and good use of the gatefold with some good information on key personnel involved in the film, and then some really nice, not too commonly seen alternate posters. Seems like these two are seemingly alternate lobby posters or lobby cards, and I must admit, those look really nice in terms of poster design. The Criterion insert here, it details that they used MGM's 35mm archival negative, and then the audio work was carried off of the optical master track, the optical master materials that were available, and then it goes into the commentaries and how they're on analog track 2, and how you'll have to also switch around because there are some alternate bits of audio information during the supplemental features section, which is common on Criterion disc, where the digital track will carry the audio and then the analog track will carry additional tracks of information, so you'll have to switch between those to get the extra material. And again, this does still have some exclusive features that are only on this disc. Most of the stuff eventually came out on the MGM version, and then of course there was the MGM box set, which had more features, and then Warner took over the film and has put out multiple restorations and DVDs, culminating in the big Blu-ray box sets with the new 4K master only on the 3D disc, unfortunately. But that version pretty much gathers together all of the features from the DVDs and previous Blu-rays. So it just leaves a couple, I think 2 or 3 things that are only on this Criterion disc. So This is a really nice piece. You get a really nice essay from Ronald Haver here. And again, there's an audio commentary. There's some home movies from the composer of the film, some deleted sequences and materials, and some remembrances, and it's just kind of jam-packed with all kinds of fun stuff in the supplemental section. Quite a bit more than a usual Criterion release, and this is really one of their really big important titles at the time, because of course it's such a big landmark film. This was the time at which, you know, some of the major studios were starting to let Criterion and some of the other small labels license stuff out, and then that quickly died. And ironically, we're starting to see this come back in the era of boutique Blu-rays and studios not wanting to promote their physical media departments. So it's kind of funny that everything's following a cyclical pattern. So I do plan on checking this against the MGM disc. Again, I think they use the same element. The MGM transfers usually would be a couple years later, about 2 or 3 years later. And from my own experience, they're usually a tad bit sharper than Criterion transfers of the same element. But of course, they don't have the same level of attention to detail in terms of the extra features and CAV encoding and all that stuff. So I do hope to really get time to check them out and compare them, just to see if they are similar or different. Both are supposed to be from original Technicolor Elements, and both are supposed to be different from what was later on the Oz box set, and then all the various remasterings during the DVD era. Of course, you're really going to want to go out and get the Blu-ray of Wizard of Oz, and then if you get the 3D disc, there's a brand new encoding of the new 4K transfer that's supposed to be even better, but you have to have a player that allows you to play a 3D disc and then just switch to only watching the 2D option. I don't think they ever should have applied 3D to this film, but you know, at least they did a proper, you know, modern negative restoration that was better than the original Blu-ray. But in terms of Laserdisc and, you know, getting every last scrap of extra features to have every single one available, you'll still have to pick up this Criterion release. It's taken me years to find one of these. It can go for quite a bit on the used market. They're not specifically rare, but they do command a higher price, so do be prepared for that. And as far as I know, I don't think there's a CLV movie-only cheaper reissue of this. So this is one of those where you have to track this one down. And otherwise, you can get the MGM standard ones for literally dirt cheap. Those are super common. And like I said, I think they share the same transfer, or they transfer the same element. So you can pretty much get what you'll get picture-wise and sound-wise on this Criterion disc. Another thing of note that I've read, some people say that some of the audio mix of the original mono was kind of futzed around with when they did the Ultimate Oz box set in the late 90s, and that's kind of carried over ever since. So I plan on doing some comparisons between this one and the early MGM disc that I have, and then compare that to some of the later versions of the mono track to see if I can pinpoint any differences. So those are the reasons why this is an important title to have, and it's a really, really nice Criterion package. I'd say it's probably up there with, you know, Ghostbusters and a couple others for having a really great supplemental section with some good exclusives and a really, really nice transfer. So definitely highly recommended if you can find one. Next up is spine number 130. This is the Criterion release of 49th Parallel. Beautiful, beautiful glossy jacket. Lovely looking image. This is one of the lesser known films of Michael Powell. And if you studied Powell and Pressburger's work, there really is no minor work. All of them are so just completely either ahead of their time or works in and of themselves that are just almost perfectly formed. It's like they just magically appeared, and they're just absolutely incredible. If you've never seen any of the Archer's films or any of the films that Powell did later on his own, you're doing yourself a disservice. So I was very happy to pick this one up. It's not very common and has some exclusive Criterion extras, primarily a commentary. And the jacket's a really nice glossy printing, as I said before. I think the image does work pretty well. It's, again, the usual sort of Criterion teal green that turns up on things like this and the releases of Rebecca, for example. So I actually think it does work quite well with a black and white image. And I think the image that they chose actually looks pretty good due to just the staging of the shot. Show you the rear. You get a nice Criterion essay for Bruce Eder, who does most of the commentaries. I think, yeah, he does the commentary for this one too. I always really love when he does, well, did commentaries back in the day. I don't know if he does so much anymore. Again, it does have a digital mono track, and then it has the analog mono, and then analog track 2 is the commentary. So that's really the only extra you have. The little box down here talks about how they went and found the best available duplicate element to transfer, and even though they're just telling you it's going to have some damage and stuff, at the time this was the best element in the world. So they felt pretty confident that this was the single best version they could possibly make at the time. And a lot of the Archers films have needed a lot of help over the years. And thankfully Criterion's done a number of them, and a number of Powell's films. So again, I cannot stress the importance of these enough. And the cast in here is really fantastic. It's like a who's who of British actors at the time. So really, really nice release. Pretty uncommon and can go for quite a bit, and has a really nice exclusive commentary. Next up is Spine 146. This is the Criterion CAV special edition release of Midnight Cowboy. And this is one where the CLV version is going to be a lot more common. And I was just really wanting to pick this one up for the couple of extras it has. The original mono track, which is not on every later release. And of course, because even though Criterion put it out on Blu-ray, the new master was subject to some color timing issues that seemed to be put on them by the originating studio, which would have been MGM, which has happened with a couple other titles, such as Bull Durham. And that caused a bunch of controversy on internet forums and Blu-ray forums and such. And I really wanted to track down the Criterion Laserdisc for the original mono track, the extras, and to also check the color and see what it looks like. So I'm very happy to finally pick this up. I really like the image they've chose. I like the color. I like the fact they kept the title block brown, so it all really goes together and really befits the film, I think. Really, really nice gatefold. Get some nice quotes there. The actually, this is just a little blurb about the film, and then a really nice overlay on the back. And they use most of the gatefold, which is really, really nice. Now here, in a sort of MGM style, they have some random stills, but at least they're placed and not color tinted, so that's nice. And the Criterion essay actually continues in here inside the gatefold, so it's actually a pretty long one. Starts on the back and then continues in here. Let me show you the rear in the usual Criterion style, but again, because the essay is so long, it runs into the gatefold. Production credits, and then the special features are an exclusive audio commentary, the original trailer, and then a bunch of stills with a small Criterion typical supplemental section with some text stills. And again, it's full CAV, so the film makes it onto 4 sides, and then the rest of side 4 is the supplemental section and color bars. So again, just really, really nice. If you do manage to find the CAV version, I'd recommend it over the standard one, but again, it's a lot harder to come by. It's not specifically rare, but you are going to have to pay a bit more, and I'm just very happy to finally pick it up. Been wanting to rewatch this film for some time, and I was not a fan of the color tweaks that appeared on the new Blu-ray, so I'm excited to go through this and revisit the film. Speaking of the Archers, here's one of the really, I'd say, higher-end Criterion releases on the format. This is Spine number 249. This is the Criterion release of the Red Shoes. This is one of their really nice trifolds. Gorgeous artwork. Of course, this has been restored several times, and the new Criterion Blu-ray looks excellent because it's from the new Technicolor restoration. So, you know, going back to this, and then the DVD was a port of this, the first Criterion DVD. You know, you're going to be going back to a prior attempt at restoration. But I just really wanted to see what it looked like and check out the PCM mono track on this and look at some of the Laserdisc extras. And again, it's a really, really nice package. Unfortunately, this copy has a little bit of creasing, but anytime you have one of these trifolds, they're very hard to keep in perfect shape. I know myself and a lot of others much prefer standard gatefolds or box sets if you have multiple discs, but it's still mostly in great shape. And again, the price was right, so I'm really happy to finally be able to check out the Laserdisc version from Criterion. Beautiful, beautiful panels, sort of given a old world storybook feel with the text and the sort of gold overlays on the edges. Really, really nice printing with tons of really nice information. Here's the interior panel with the essay. It's pretty much running from panel to panel. Again, they keep the motif going, so it's really, really well done. In the center inner panel, you have your chapter listings. Again, this is CAV encoded, so it makes it onto 5 sides. The supplements start at the end of side 5 and run all the way on to side 6. So it is a pretty substantial Criterion special features section, even though they've added a lot more extras to the new Blu-ray, and I recommend you also pick that up. Show you the other panel. These are always kind of hard to do on camera without seeing what I'm doing. Just another reason why the tri-panel, yes, it looks really nice, but it's hard to work with. Show you the rear, if I can get it closed back right. Now again, this is more of the modern, well, shouldn't say modern, but the more modern Criterion rear style. This is sort of similar to what would turn up on their release of El Cid, for example. Really substantial special features, primarily the audio commentary, and then several pieces from Martin Scorsese's collection of Archer's memorabilia. And again, all this stuff has been replicated on the Criterion DVD and the Criterion Blu-ray. So there's nothing really exclusive to this outside of being the old transfer and having a PCM mono track. So I'm just really excited to check this out. It's not super common, beautifully packaged, and I'm just really interested to see what the old restoration looks like on CAV Laserdisc. So if you've never seen the film, it's an absolute must, just like any of the Archer's films. But you know, if you stumble across the Criterion Laserdisc release, yeah, I'd definitely say pick it up, because you're probably not going to see it again for a while, and these trifolds are hard to get in good shape. So, and of course the film is absolutely fantastic, so you can't go wrong with any version. All right, last but not least is Criterion Spine number 336. This is also a very, very uncommon one. This is the special edition release of The English Patient. Of course, this was competing with the regular standard Disney release under the Miramax banner, which I think they are I don't know if they're supposed to have different transfers, because I haven't gotten to watch this yet. But of course, this has all the special features and AC3 and this absolutely fantastic cover. I mean, good grief, this cover alone is worth the purchase. It's easily frameable. It's definitely the best cover for the film, even though I think the other of the Disney disc with the original poster artwork is very great. But of course, that's in sort of a 90s style of poster layout design. But this is totally should have been the one sheet for the ad campaign. It's of course very Lawrence of Arabia-esque, but it definitely has its own style and tone, and obviously it's from a different era. And as huge of a Lawrence fan as I am, I absolutely love this image. I think it fits the film perfectly, and I think this is one of the best covers on the format, period. I never thought it looked as good until I actually had it in my hands. It's fantastic. I have the original director sticker. It's been saved, thankfully, by the seller, who was nice enough to put it in the bag. It's a little worn and stuff, but most of these usually got tossed or torn or thrown away or whatever. So it's nice to have as just to keep inside there. So it is a director-approved transfer. Let me show you the gatefold. Again, done kind of like El Cid and some of the other more modern ones, where they use the gatefold to spread the chapters and information and tons of liner notes in the regular essay. So really, really well done, and definitely what this film deserved, and really the only nicely packaged version of this film that's ever existed, because the DVD is pretty bare bones from Miramax, and then their Blu-ray is like just another cheap bare bones disc. I mean, the HD master looks pretty good, but I hadn't seen this film in a while, and actually being able to pick this up, I'm excited to go see it again because it's been a long while. And this packaging is just so freaking gorgeous. And, it's quite rare. I never thought I'd pick this one up. I thought, oh, it's just like, the Disney disc with a Criterion banner because it'll be the same master and we'll have some nice extras. But, it's like not anything special. But now I have it in my hands and I'm like, oh no, this is just gorgeous. So again, the more modern rear with the extras here. It's listed as the director-approved widescreen transfer. Includes the trailers and television spots and a 42-minute making of documentary. And then I think there's it's listed as a screen-specific audio commentary by the director and others. So I guess it's not running for the whole feature, but hopefully it's usually when they say that it might be 20 minutes combined of commentary, but hopefully it's a bit more than that. I don't think I've ever listened to the commentary for this film. Again, it does have Dolby AC3 in addition to Dolby Surround PCM, so you get both. And then the other analog track will be the commentary. It is CLV. There's no CAV encoding going on here, so it should be pretty similar to the regular Miramax disc. But again, I don't know if they are the same transfer. This might be a different one since it's listed as director approved. I think there's something on some of the Laserdisc database forums that this is supposed to be different somehow. So I'm very excited to check this out. Gorgeous packaging. I do think the film is quite underrated and definitely highly recommended. And if you ever do find the Criterion, it looks fantastic. Oh, I also forgot to mention, it does have the THX mastering stamp, which is on only a few Criterions. So it's actually on there for whatever good that's going to do, if that's, going to mean that they went through it with a fine-tooth comb or not, but it's there. So this is one of the few Criterions that is THX approved. So absolutely gorgeous packaging. Again, I can't say enough about the packaging. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the best jackets on the format easily, and just a beautiful looking Criterion release of a, at the time, modern title. Next up are some of the horror titles I've picked up. This one I've wanted for a very, very long time. It's very hard to come by, even though it's apparently a direct repressing and exact a copy of the original Encore Edition version, which itself is not super easy to find. This is the 1991 Universal repressing of the quote-unquote restored version of Dracula. They called that the restored versions of Dracula and Frankenstein simply when the first time they tried to clean them up for home video and put back in all the pieces that were missing from the various censored reissues. So this is essentially the original Encore Edition disc with the black cover, simply repressed with the updated Classic Monster VHS artwork, which looks really great on a Laserdisc jacket, although I wish they would have used the full jacket. But, for what it is, it looks really nice. And the purple goes with the tinted rear cover that was also on the VHS release. So unfortunately, even though this is 1991, and it should have digital sound and should be a lot cleaner, it's pretty much a replica of the original Encore disc. So it is analog sound only for some ungodly reason. I don't know why they did that. They went to the trouble of reprinting this with the brand new art and didn't give it a digital track when they were doing digital sound on everything by this time. So that's really frustrating. But the disc is a little bit cleaner than the older one and much harder to find, so I'm very happy to finally have this. And again, the rear follows what was on the Classic Monster VHS release. And of course, having a Laserdisc jacket, you get much more space for everything to have breathing room. And it looks pretty nice. I always loved the tinting they used on these. And these covers on the tape releases are still highly collectible and very much sought after by myself and many others who grew up during that era. It's definitely probably the best packaging that these films ever got outside of the using the original poster artwork, which of course Universal is still seemingly reluctant to do. So again, no special features outside of having the theatrical trailer, and it does include some production photographs. And there's another holdover of this being simply the older disc repackaged. If you look at the chapter index, side 1, none. Because Universal cares about its customers. So no digital sound, sadly, and it's still the same old disc without chapters. So again, if you come across this, definitely pick it up. The reason why I've been picking up all the various Universal Classic Horror titles is because every time they get reissued on video, there's small differences here and there. They all have instances of frames missing and things going wrong on later versions, so you basically have to compare them across every version you can get your hands on. And unfortunately, not all of the Universal Horrors came out on Laserdisc. Some came out earlier, some came out in the 90s, and then some wound up only coming out as pretty late releases in Japan, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, for example. And even Frankenstein, some of the others got reissued in Japan later on, and they got digital soundtracks, and they were slightly cleaned up, and they're slightly different to the first DVD run, which was another remastering process. So it's never easy collecting the classic Universal Horrors, and like I said, they all can vary and differ on each release, so it's very important to get all the ones you can get your hands on. So I'm finally happy to pick this one up. It's definitely the best US pressing out there. Outside of the original DiscoVision version, if you can find one that's somehow not rotted. But in terms of stability and cleanliness, this is the one you're going to want to have to go for. It just unfortunately doesn't have a digital soundtrack. Moving on, I finally managed to pick up the original Encore edition of Frankenstein. This one never got a reissue here in the States. It did get a late reissue in Japan. So this is the only version you can get outside of the first DiscoVision release. And it uses a version of the original artwork. This is what was used on the VHS tape at the time, hence the dimensions. But it looks really nice with the black background, and you get the little restored version moniker. This was, again, the first attempt at Universal to try and get it back closer to the original 1931 release version. This and Dracula and some of the others, when they were reissued after the production code came into effect, had to be censored in terms of what the code dictated. So many things just got chopped right out and were missing for decades. So the quality of the restored scenes, of course, vary. And of course, this is also analog only. There's no digital soundtrack, unfortunately. Let me show you the rear. This pretty much dovetails with the other releases from this time period of the classic horrors. You do get some chapters on here. At least they were nice enough to do that. And actually, I think some of these, I think, are listed out a little bit more specifically to try to get you to some of the restored bits. But again, like with every Universal horror, you have to collect various different versions and really do some comparisons to see, you know, what's missing where. And it's also interesting to see how these films progressed over time with advances in technology, for example, to see how much more clean they could get through the years. And the current Blu-rays are really exceptional for the most part. I would argue there's one or two little minor things. There's still some instances of frames missing, and I would argue that on a good number of the films, some of the noise cleanup and audio restoration work was a bit heavy-handed in removing some of the hiss and crackle, especially on the early films like this and Dracula especially. But this film does have a lot of noise reduction on the later releases. Well, on the Blu-ray, I mean. So I'm really interested to finally see this. And of course, again, if you can find it a DiscoVision original without any rot, you are a lucky person. And I hope to check the ones out for Dracula in this film at some point, and of course Bride of Frankenstein as well. But this is just another title to add to my Universal Horrors on Laserdisc. And outside of the DiscoVision original and then the Japanese late release, which I think is from like 98 or 99, it's a super late release. This is the only US release that's really available and watchable. And again, I just wish it had come out a little later with digital sound or gotten a reissue, but unfortunately it didn't. Now, speaking of classic horror being restored on Laserdisc, and this one is not Universal, but it actually is a restored version, and it does have a digital soundtrack. This is the MGM-UA release of the 1932 classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Definitely, I mean, it's easily the best of the Jekyll and Hyde film adaptations. There are several others that work and have their own strengths, but this is the most well-recognized and I'd argue the most stable and the best done overall of all of them. The later MGM-41 version was designed to kind of replace this and didn't. You can get this on DVD with the 41 version as a double feature. I think that's actually gone out of print now, so the Laserdisc is now becoming kind of an easier way to see this. I would hope this gets released by the Warner Archive on Blu-ray at some point because it is a bona fide horror classic. This is, of course, the first time they were able to present the uncut pre-code version, because this, again, came out before the production code came into effect, and then when it got reissued, it was chopped and conformed to code edits. So for years, you saw it with little pieces missing all over the place. So as far as I know, this was the first video release of the original pre-code version. And it's not anything major as far as I remember. I think it's a lot of little pieces all over the place, but it makes the film play a lot better. The artwork does look pretty nice. Again, MGM always had this manner of taking original imagery and kind of giving it that sort of airbrush look. And for this cover, it does work, and they do make note that it is in black and white, and it is the restored, uncut version, so that was nice of them. A lot of studios would do all this work and then not really indicate on the packaging that it was finally the uncut version. The rear is also pretty nice, again in a MGM style that wasn't used as much as just having the background being blank, but you can see this is the same sizing and type that they would use. And this is a slightly older design because all of the chapters are hidden up here in a tiny little text box up here. Just a single disc, no real special features or anything. I think really the special feature is finally being able to see the original pre-code film in its original edit to the best technical ability they had at the time. And I think the DVD is probably just a port of this same master, just probably spiffed up a bit. I think there's a little bit of features on that double feature set. I've watched it before, I've rented it before, I just never got the chance to actually own it, and I've been meaning to pick it up, but apparently it's gone out of print, so that's why I doubled my efforts to finally find this Laserdisc. The 41 version is also available from MGM, but if I'm remembering correctly, I think that's just a analog only disc from the late 80s, so it's a little bit older than this, so the quality will not be quite as good as this one. And again, this is not common. A lot of the classic horror titles are not easy to find on Laserdisc. They can get a bit pricey simply due to the lack of availability, but this is one highly recommended, a well-made title, and again, the first time you could see it in its original form. Next up, two titles that go on my director's shelf. This, of course, would go under James Cameron. This is one I never intended to pick up, but it popped up locally for literally less than $1, so I figured I would add it to my shelf to do a comparison. It turns out this is actually quite uncommon. This is not the first release of this film on Laserdisc, but it's actually the second. This is the Image HBO video Laserdisc of the Terminator, using the standard Image jacket. The first release was slightly different. I think that was from about 85 or so. This disc is from 1989. And as I said before, it is actually very uncommon. The Laserdisc database lists it for some pretty high prices. And I'm just very happy to pick it up. I'm interested to compare it to my two letterbox copies, the original Hemdale one and then the THX mastered reissue. This, of course, is pan and scan, but it does have a digital mono track, and I'm just really excited to check this out. Again, it uses the original iconic poster artwork, and it looks pretty nice on the jacket. There's some slight gloss to it. Let me show you the rear. Again, nothing special, just pretty much the original Image style jacket, but it does kind of have a nice vintage feel to it. And you can pretty much imagine this being the VHS tape at the time period. The only other thing I'll mention is that on both sides there's a little sticker that says Weintraub Entertainment Group that's actually been stuck on here. So I guess that's a rights or distribution thing, and they just literally put a sticker on the jacket on both sides. So that's another interesting little touch. And then, of course, I don't know why this is under HBO Video at the time, but there you go. So again, this is pretty much, if you're interested in the film in pan and scan, this is probably the version you're going to be on the lookout for, because this should be a lot better than the older one, which is analog only and is about 4 years older than this, so the pressing quality should be a lot better on this one. But anyway, I just picked this up because it was literally dirt cheap, and I'm interested to compare it to the later versions. And it's a pretty nice jacket in the typical Image style, and you know, you can never have enough T1. All right, next up is John Ford's final theatrical release. This is the MGM letterbox release of Seven Women. I'm very happy to pick this up. I haven't gotten to see this film in quite some time, and I do think it's a lot better than the pretty crummy critical reputation I got at the time. It's kind of gotten a reappraisal through the years, but pretty much only in the circles of Ford scholars, because unfortunately, John Ford's canon and body of work are absurdly very little known in this day and age, which is insane. But anyway, it's done in the typical MGM style, sort of that airbrushed look, and it's an interesting looking cover. And I think it does work for the film. It just isn't exactly what I would have chosen, but it looks nice, and I guess it's dramatic looking enough. You can tell this is the updated letterbox bar, so that this disc is a little bit later than most of their letterbox titles. I think it was pressed in about 93 or so. And again, the rear is in the typical MGM style. You have the blank gold bar on the top. I like the stills they've chosen, and the color background looks very nice. It's very pleasing to the eye. And you get a little bit of text here that talks very briefly that this is Ford's final film. Unfortunately, the only extra is the theatrical trailer. And since this, it's come out on DVD in the, I think it's in the John Ford collection box from Warner Brothers with some of the other lesser known Ford films. But unfortunately, that's kind of out of print and can go for a little bit on eBay at least. And I've been meaning to pick that up, so at least this Laserdisc gets me one closer for the time being. And of course, I'll be interested to check out the transfer and listen to the digital mono track. But anyway, a really nice disc, and essential for anyone's Ford collection on Laserdisc. Definitely the first good release this film had on video. All right, next up, just going to the standard disc in chronological order. This is a film I've never seen, and I'm actually quite interested to see, from 1932. This is the Image release of The Lost Squadron. Again, I just found this locally. It was dirt cheap, and as soon as I see Joel McCrea in anything, I'm automatically interested. Combined with Eric von Stroheim and Mary Astor, I was like, wow, this is a must for me. Again, this is a standard Image jacket. It has the Turner Home Entertainment logo on the back. Sorry, on the corner. And, the still they've chosen is kind of nice, and it's, of course, very much in the sort of way black and white films were presented on disc and tape at this time, usually with a colorized still, and especially if it's a film you've never heard of, they kind of promote the actors you might recognize. It does have a digital mono track. Unfortunately, there's a little hole punch in it, but apparently this disc is actually quite rare. The values on the Laserdisc database were actually pretty darn high. So I'm now very happy that I picked this up. And again, I've never seen this film, never really heard of it. I think I may have read of it somewhere because the title seems familiar. So I'm excited to actually see this. And again, I don't know if this is available on DVD. That might be the reason for the value being a bit higher. It may just be one of those that has not made it to DVD, or maybe is only on DVD from one of the archive services. So again, excited to see this, and just another apparently difficult to obtain classic that I've been able to turn up. Along a similar vein, here's another Image disc, this one from the RKO Classic Collection. This is the film Having a Wonderful Time from 1938. Again, I just picked this up out of the blue. It was dirt cheap, and I think it must have been from the same place as the other one because it also has a hole punch in the cover. But like most of the RKO discs, there's a nice slight gloss on here, and the still looks pretty nice. And I'm a big Ginger Rogers fan, and I love Douglas Fairbanks Jr., so it's a must for me. So I'll be excited to see this and figure out what it's all about. Again, has a digital mono track and pretty much just movie only, like most of these, but at least they were doing a good job of getting the classic library out there on disc and video, which is a lot better than most studios do today outside of the archive and on-demand division. So I'll have to spin this up and see the film. Now here's one I have been after for a very long while. It's not rare or anything, but I'm just so happy to finally have picked it up. This is the Universal Encore edition of Harvey from 1950. This is just a wonderful piece of work. If you've never seen it, you should go see it. It's really just one of those indescribable pictures. You know, it's one of those you should just go in cold and not have anything spoiled for you. It does have a digital mono track, and I guess to tie in to the Encore edition of Winchester 73, which essentially has a commentary track with Jimmy Stewart, this release of Harvey has a special introduction that Jimmy did for the Laserdisc release. And I think that's kind of ironic that the reason why I put those two films together anyway is that they were very famously part of a two-film deal that was quite a landmark in terms of Hollywood history. It really perpetuated the idea of profit participation because Stewart really wanted to get Harvey made and he wanted to be in it. And the deal was that to get Harvey made, he had to do this little potboiler Western that, you know, had been never gotten off the ground for a couple years, and ironically that turned out and developed into one of the greatest westerns ever made and a gigantic financial success that spawned a whole new run of westerns in the early 1950s. And as good as Harvey is, it was supposed to be the A feature, and the little western kind of started to outshine it, so I always thought that was kind of funny. Anyway, the rear is pretty nice. It's a bit better than most Universal jackets. Some nice stills, and the chapter stops are nicely encoded here and actually readable. It does include the original trailer, so that's at least another nice bonus you get on this. But other than that, there's no real special features outside the trailer and the introduction. So really the reason to pick this up is for the PCM mono, or if you really want the film on Laserdisc. So I'm interested to compare this to the DVD just out of curiosity, but this is a really great film and not talked about enough, and I'm a huge Stewart fan, so this was a must. Next up is a film from 1952 that I have never heard of. This is another classic title I've picked up simply because it was literally less than $1. This is The Miracle of Our Lady of Fatima. I have never heard of this, but it seems to be in the style of films like The Song of Bernadette and other things, based on, true events and stories, and one of those sort of hopeful message films, I guess you could call it. So again, this was just one I picked up because it was cheap and it seemed interesting, and it has a score by Max Steiner, so that is reason enough alone to watch this. It does include the original trailer. It does have a PCM mono track. Other than that, it's a typical Warner's cover, and it looks pretty nice. I have no real information about the film because, again, I'd never really heard of it before. So, and even the jacket kind of mentions it kind of follows films like Song of Bernadette and Keys of the Kingdom and others. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this is like. And I don't think this is super common, so I'll have to watch this and then see if it's any good or not. Next up, from 1962, this is a film that I really, really like, and I always wondered what the Laserdisc was like. This is the Universal Letterbox release of the film Lonely Are the Brave, which is a really, really great, it's basically a revisionist Western in a lot of ways, but it's from 1962. So this kind of thematically ties in with, say, for example, Ride the High Country, which came out the same year, sort of a revisionist Western before that was really a popular term. This is one of Kirk Douglas's favorite films and that he ever made, and so the rear has a really nice sort of, actually it's all commentary from Douglas himself about how much he wanted to do this film, how much he enjoyed making it, and how proud he is still of it at the time this disc was made. Of course, this is letterbox, and this was the first time you could see the film in its proper aspect ratio. It has the digital mono track and the original trailer, so pretty much the extra features here are the really nice interview pieces here on the rear and the original trailer. So a little bit nicer than most Universal discs, but other than that, just a single disc. But again, this is the only version on Laserdisc that you should be after. And there's a pretty decent DVD of this available, but unfortunately there's not like a really great Blu-ray out there. I think there may be one, I can't remember if it's one that's come out in Europe, but it's pretty much just like a repressing of the older DVD master. I don't think there's been like a really great modern cleanup of this film, and it would look really fantastic on like a new, 4K transfer or something. But of course, one can always have pipe dreams, right? So anyway, really nice Laserdisc, highly recommended film if you've never seen it, and definitely pick it up if you happen to stumble across it. Now next up is a image title that's actually pan and scan, and I don't normally pick up pan and scan titles, but this is the only release of this film on Laserdisc, and it has a PCM track. I was interested to compare to later releases, and it's a really good underrated film. This is the Image/Vestron release of Shout at the Devil, which is one of the 70s films that is not a Bond film starring Roger Moore. Is directed by Peter Hunt, so this basically reteams them after the 1974 film Gold, which is also equally underrated. This is the film that Roger co-starred with Lee Marvin. It's a really good, kind of forgotten about adventure film from the mid to late 70s, and it seemed a lot of these films were coming out of Britain primarily, and either they were straight up adventure films or sort of more World War II themed. Another example would be Force 10 from Navarone, or Escape to Athena, or Roger later popped up in the film North Sea Hijack, or also called Folks here in the US. All great, underrated, kind of forgotten about action thrillers. So, and I'm a big Peter Hunt fan, so this very nicely uses the original artwork, so you can overlook the typical image jacket. Like I said, this is actually very rare, so that's why I picked it up. It was literally $1.50, so I figured I'd check it out and compare it to the Shout Factory has a Blu-ray out there that's pretty decent, so that's really the only good version of the film out there on video currently, but I was interested to check out the Laserdisc and see how it compared, particularly the PCM track. So I'm going to have to do that, but yeah, I just wish this was letterbox. That's my only complaint. But yeah, just happy to pick this up. Like I said, I wouldn't normally have, but it was so cheap and it's so rare that I figured why not? I'd be kicking myself if I didn't. Next up, also from 1976, this is the Warner's letterbox release of the Star is Born remake. The reason why I picked this up is actually very simple. This is the first film that was actually released theatrically in Dolby Stereo in terms of a large engagement. And so I was interested to check out the PCM Dolby Stereo surround track on this disc, since that's technically the first Dolby Stereo track there is, outside of, tests and things like that. So it uses the, I guess you would say, iconic art that's on the soundtrack and all the posters and stuff. And, they're great fans of this film. There are people who hate this film. Some people like particular versions of this story. I honestly don't mind it. I think this has some good stuff in it, and I think obviously the new fourth version takes a lot of cues from this version. Of course, it's in the standard Warner's jacket. It does actually indicate, thankfully, that it is in widescreen. But most importantly is this box here actually talks about this film was the first Dolby Stereo release. And they go into detail that you might hear some slight echoing in the rear channel because this was directly transferred from the original Dolby Stereo master. And they didn't do anything to mess around with it because they wanted to perfectly replicate the original matrixed 4-channel stereo surround experience. So I was very excited to actually check that out because I'm sure it's been remixed in EQ because the later versions are all 5.1 on DVD and Blu-ray and such. So that's why I picked this up, and it's dirt cheap and it's a common title, and this one's actually still sealed, which is nice. And of course that leads to some crumpling corners because of the usual Warner packaging job. But really, I just picked this up for the historical importance of the sound and to check out the sound mix and actually be able to listen to the first Dolby Stereo mix ever made. Next up is also important for sound. This is the Universal release of Roller Coaster Letterboxd. Roller Coaster is, of course, one of the handful of films released in Sensurround in select engagements. Roller Coaster, I think it was the last one that actually came out in Sensurround. It was either this or Battlestar Galactica, Battlestar Galactica. I can't remember which one came out last. But of course, after Earthquake, all the other films, Roller Coaster included, came out in the new version of Sensurround, which was essentially a mono track with the Sensurround enhancement as well, whereas Earthquake was actually stereo with the Sensurround enhancement. So what this disc features is actually the original mono mix without the Sensurround, sadly. Later versions, I think there's a DVD that tries to do Sensurround, but it doesn't really work because Sensurround has never been transferred to disc correctly. It's a very complicated system. It could be done, but no one's actually done it, unfortunately. Roller Coaster has been restored and cleaned up. It's available on, I think, at least 2 different HD masters on Blu-ray, so you can pick it up if you like. And that there is a variant of Sensurround on there, I think. But if you pick up this Laserdisc, or I think the first DVD is a port of this, it carries the original mono mix, but again, sadly, without the Sensurround. You know, for having just floating faces on here, I do like the jacket. I like the red. I like the roller coaster background. So it is a really nice looking jacket, and it's very pleasing to the eye. The rear's pretty good. Typical Universal style, just using a background image for the whole cover. But the way they've laid everything out, it really works, making this V shape. So I do commend them on that. No special features on here, just movie only. So this is a nice disc you can pick up. If you want to see one of the Sensurround films on Laserdisc, you can pick this up, but unfortunately it's just the original mono track. Alright, next up is a title I've wanted to pick up for a long time. This is a pretty commonly, well, very desirable Laserdisc title, simply because the packaging is so nice. This is the Deluxe Widescreen Collector's Edition reissue of Highlander, and this was the premiere of the Director's Cut version. It's in a beautifully packaged trifold pack with a really nice, I don't really know, I guess it's sort of, I guess you would call it a matte finish, and then with really nice embossing. Unfortunately, this copy has a bit of wear on the front cover, but I think that's pretty common on these, since the, I guess the matte cover is susceptible to more damage than most. But for the price I paid, which was $1, I was just happy to finally find it, and this just was not going to not come home with me for $1. But the printing is absolutely beautiful. The sword itself, I don't know if you can tell, is also printed with a with an embossed ink, so it really just stands out. And this is easily one of the best Laserdisc jackets I've seen, period. Of course, I'm not really a fan of trifolds, but this one seems a bit sturdier than most. I do wish it didn't have the damage on the front, but it's not bad, and it still looks very, very nice. It's extraordinarily well done. Of course, you can see this gets the THX seal and has a Dolby Surround track in addition to a AC3 5.1 track. Of course, this is the Director's Cut version, so there are many additional bits and pieces, scenes reinstated, things changed around. I think when they made the new transfer, I think they may have done a little bit of work on some of the effects, a little bit, in terms of trying to fine-tune some of them in the video era. And then they also did a brand new sound mix and presented in Dolby Surround and AC3. Here you get a nice written piece from the director and producers, and again, the images look beautiful on this. They're all printed with a nice glossy finish. The chapters are on the first panel. The film makes it onto 2 sides, and then the third side is the supplemental features. So it's actually only a 2-disc set, but for some reason they decided, oh, we're just going to do a trifold instead of a gatefold. I mean, the images are nice, but I would prefer to have just a gatefold. But at least this one is very well done, and like I said, it seems a bit sturdier than, like, say, for example, some of the Criterion trifolds I have. Here it goes into a little bit of detail about the remastering process. They basically went back to the original camera negative pieces that they had, and then the magnetic stereo audio master. I guess this film originally came out in Dolby Stereo, but I think there was also mono prints. I'm not sure if it was supposed to be originally mono. I know some people aren't a big fan of the remix. I mean, it's okay, but then again, I'm not a huge Highlander geek, so I don't have like the same level of intricate knowledge about this particular film that some hardcore fans do. And the rear is also pretty nice. Also have the embossed title, and then around the side you have this really nice design that sort of makes it look more fitting to the film instead of just being a plain black jacket. That goes over the special features here, which is pretty much just the original trailer, a brand new audio commentary with the producers and directors, and the brand new transfer, and then a big supplemental section with photos from deleted scenes and production materials, and then a bunch of text slides explaining the various scenes and stuff, and then a virtual 3D photograph of the katana sword. So I'll have to check that out. I don't know exactly how that's going to be put on here outside of just a like mid-90s CD-ROM looking 3D photo. Yeah, it's just a really nice release. It's technically, not a super deluxe special edition in terms of it's just 2 discs, and so you're pretty much getting the trailer commentary and then like a small I guess Criterion-ish text slide supplemental section, but the packaging is really well done, and it's just a cut above what you usually would get, and especially since this is technically coming out of Republic Pictures, who usually did box sets where they just polished up an old master and threw an insert in and then called it a box set. So this is just really, really nice. Again, it may not be exactly 100% pure to the original theatrical release, and there's now been the new 4K restoration that's available, and that does have the remix and the original mix and stuff, and it's supposed to be better than the previous Blu-ray. So there is at least a modern version of this film that looks and sounds pretty good. It's not perfect. I know some people say that the new version maybe has some teal in the coloring, but again, I'm not a huge Highlander geek. I've only seen the film a handful of times, and I'm really wanting to revisit it and check out this director's cut Laserdisc. But this is definitely the version on Laserdisc you're going to want to track down if you're after this film. But beautiful packaging, absolutely gorgeous. Next up is a title I've wanted to see for a while. I know it just came out on Blu-ray. I'm trying to remember who released it, but it's just an old Sony Columbia master. This is the release of Geronimo, an American Legend, directed by Walter Hill. I've never actually gotten to see this all the way through, so I've been wanting to see it for ages. It pretty much came out on this Laserdisc, got ported to a DVD, and then that was it for a good number of years. And then, like I said, it just got released on Blu-ray. I'm trying to remember who put it out. I don't think it was Twilight Time, but I think it was one of the specialty labels, and it's gotten pretty good reviews. But again, when a Laserdisc pops up for cheap and it's a film I've been wanting to see, I figure why not. Of course, this is a Sony Columbia disc pressed by the DADC plant. It doesn't have a rot report on the Laserdisc database, but this copy is from the DADC Austria plant, so that was like a mark of double confidence for me, since that usually gets you rot-free copies. This is the same cover as the DVD, and as you can see, it's pretty much sized for VHS dimensions, and they use some critical blurbs over here. This film is pretty well regarded as far as I can understand, so I've been wanting to see this for a while. And the back is pretty much like most Columbia releases. You get some really nice, pretty well done liner notes, kind of in smaller print, with a nice bit of background. There's a Dolby Surround PCM track, no AC3, and I don't think there was 5.1 on the DVD either. I think there may be 5.1 on the Blu-ray, I'm not sure. But other than that, it's just movie-only, single disc. And yeah, I've just been wanting to see this for ages, so, a cheap Laserdisc from the DADC Austria plant, that's a good a way as any to finally see this. All right, next up is another blind buy. This is a Paramount release of a 1994 film. This is the Browning version, pressed and released by Pioneer. You get the typical Paramount later widescreen banner across the top. And again, this is a total blind buy for me. It was a cheap disc in a local store, and since I'm trying to see other films that Albert Finney was in, I figured that this was going to be good enough for seeing this. Never really heard of it, to be honest. But some of the pedigree in the credits is, kind of enticing. Produced by Ridley Scott and directed by Mike Figgis, so it has to be at least worth your 99 cents. As you could see, this was a 99-cent Laserdisc. Has a Dolby Surround encoded digital track, no AC3. I guess this film either didn't get AC3 in theaters, or this is just yet another example of a studio not springing for getting the Dolby licensed AC3 track on their Laserdisc release. But just a standard movie-only disc, but it looks pretty nice. The front cover is a nice enough use of the Laserdisc dimensions, and the rear works well, and the printing is good, and the color looks nice. So looks pretty nice. A simple, straightforward 90s catalog release. Next up is a film I haven't seen in a long while. This is the Fox widescreen release of the film Nell, directed by Michael Apted. This one gets the THX stamp of approval, although I don't really know why. This is a very, intricate human drama, and of course THX is usually reserved for your big action films. You have the more modern Fox widescreen banner here, but of course it's been printed in blue instead of black. They did that on a few occasions. They changed the color up. I don't know why. I think the black with gold searchlights always looks more classy, but I guess it works for this. I don't know. I think they sometimes try to use blue for the more adult drama category, I guess. And I know sometimes they used a red or sort of pinkish for their rom-coms, for example. I think it was French Kiss has the sort of reddish top banner. The artwork on this is pretty nice. It's just a simple single disc movie only CLV release, and it has Dolby Surround PCM and no AC3. Again, I don't know if this film got AC3 because it was a 1994 film, and even at that time there were still a good number of films that didn't get AC3 mixes made. They were just released as straight Dolby SR in theaters. But you do get a really nice bit of liner notes and a little bit about the casting. The real reason why I picked this up is I've been trying to go back and see all the other films directed by the Bond directors of the original series. And Michael Apted is very well known for his series of Up documentaries and other things. And so I've been trying to go back and see some of his other stuff. And I know I saw this as a kid, and it used to be on TV a lot. This is one of those that... my sisters saw it when they were really, really little, and they saw it at too young of an age, so they still make silly references to it because they thought it was unintentionally hilarious in parts. But anyway, so I'm interested to actually go back and watch this all the way through nowadays because, as I said, I'm trying to see some of Michael Apted's other directorial works. But it looks like a pretty nice, simple Fox release, and it's a pretty common title. Just you get the THX stamp for some reason. Now here's one I hadn't intended on picking up, but this copy popped up for literally nothing, and I figured why not. This is the Warner Brothers release of the film Assassins, directed by Richard Donner. It is widescreen, because at this point Warner Brothers was actually putting that on the front cover. Oh, what's that like? I do like the artwork. It is one of those where it's obviously the original post artwork, and by this point in the 90s they were already switching to using the big face collage design. Long gone were the days of hand-drawn artist painted and drawn posters. But it looks nice on a Laserdisc jacket, and it works. Of course, this being Warner Brothers, they've used thin cardboard and shoved multiple discs into a jacket, so it's got some creasing and stuff. but this is by the point where they were using glossy cardboard on all their releases, so if you find one that's not dinged up, it can look really, really nice. Of course, this being Warner Brothers at this time, this is one of the discs where they decided they were just not going to pay for the Dolby license, and it only carries a Dolby Surround PCM track and no AC3. If I'm remembering correctly, I think the Japanese release of this has AC3. I think it's one of those. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. And of course, the DVD has 5.1, as does the Blu-ray. The film is spread onto 3 sides, and I think side 3 is CAV format, so at least you get that. Other than that, it's just going to be a nice, solid mid-90s Warner Brothers transfer and release. And I haven't seen this film in quite some time. I remember it being decent, but it really didn't quite work. And I think that's probably because it's sort of a mishmash, because this was written, one of the first big films that was actually written by the Wachowskis, and Richard Donner directed it. And I don't exactly see those two styles and ideologies really working well together, in addition to having Stallone in the movie, who is pretty well known for reworking things to, or at least kind of tailoring them to fit more of his screen image, which is not a bad thing. Every actor has to do that to some extent in each film, but Stallone is pretty well known for doing that on a lot of his films, simply because he has such a set screen image. So I think because you have those 3 different camps all going at the same time, I think that's why this doesn't really have a great reputation. But I'm interested to rewatch it and check out this Laserdisc copy and check out the transfer and the pressing quality and stuff, because by this point in 94, 95, 96, pretty much every Laserdisc title, unless something went horribly wrong, is gonna be a really nice experience for enthusiasts at least. And of course, you can get this on DVD for $1 or $2 if you want to try a 5.1 track. Next up is one I just picked up on a lark. It was, again, super cheap in a shop, and actually came with its own plastic sleeve. This is it's not exactly a late release, but it's getting there. This is the Warner Brothers letterbox release of the film Michael, with the wonderful Travolta shot. I don't know, ever since I was a kid, I would see this image, and I remember even when the posters were outside the theaters, I don't know why, the image of this I found hysterical. Just the staging or something, I still do. So that made it worth the super cheap cost alone, just to have this kind of silly looking cover. I admit that's just me, but it's just always kind of cracked me up. This and the Phenomenon poster with Travolta just doing like this pointing move, and with this sort of weird expression on his face. I don't know. It's just always cracked me up. But anyway, for a jacket, it looks nice, and it's repurposing the original poster artwork, which is always great. Of course, Warner's has actually put that it's a widescreen release, which is always helpful. Show you the rear. Pretty nice for Warner Brothers. By this time, they'd gotten their game together and making things look more appealing to the eye, at least. This does have a Dolby Surround PCM track, and this does have AC3 on it. So for some reason, they decided, hey, let's give this weird, quirky comedy an AC3 track. But yeah, this action movie called Assassins, yeah, that doesn't need AC3. They're not doing anything with it. But a John Travolta comedy with dialogue scenes, yeah, that needs AC3. Sorry, I just find the logic of what gets AC3 and what didn't get AC3 back in the day to be extremely questionable. So I try to figure out how that was ever decided. It's just a single movie-only disc with some pretty generous chapters and nice packaging. So this is just a pretty common title you can get for super cheap. If you're looking for a AC3 test title, this would be a good example, although I'm pretty sure that the mix probably isn't very special in terms of surround usage. But again, you never know, and sometimes you just need a cheap disc to test out your demodulator setup with. So I'm interested to check this out. I'm sure the transfer should be pretty nice, because this is a 96 film and the disc is a 97 pressing. So anytime I can pick up something from 97 onwards in terms of disc pressing, I'll give it a go. All right, last but certainly not least for this section of pickups is a real pièce de résistance. I never thought I would actually find one of these, and I'm just ecstatic that I did. This is the Warner Brothers Deluxe Expanded Special Version of Wyatt Earp. Of course, it uses the same artwork as the poster, the DVD, and the standard Laserdisc. What makes this different is that Lawrence Kasdan went back and put back in many of the scenes that he originally wanted included. So this version runs about 25 minutes longer than the already 3-hour plus theatrical version. And for some unknown reason, this cut is exclusive to this Laserdisc box set and is not found anywhere else. And they apparently didn't make too many of these, so this thing is incredibly rare. Goes for pretty high dollar amounts if one does pop up. And so I'm just astounded one was in the local shop, just sitting there in the shelf as if it was beckoning out to me. And I had to do a couple double takes just to make sure, because of course the cover is almost identical to the standard version. You just have to differentiate it by the red lettering on top and bottom, and the fact that it's a thick box for one movie instead of the usual Warner Brothers multi-disc shoved in a thin cardboard jacket. Now, the box and dimensions are very similar, I would say, to the Dirty Harry Warner Brothers box set. Right down to the fact that it's a overloaded box. The box flaps kind of come out some, and the side spine is the same plain white text on black printing as the Dirty Harry set. Now the rear is pretty nice, and like a lot of Laserdisc box sets, they take an image from the film and then just have a plain background and then put the credits on the bottom. There are a lot of discs in this because the film is presented entirely in CAV format. So while that is really cool, you're also going to be flipping sides like crazy because the runtime of this version is 212 minutes. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to be getting a lot. It does carry a Dolby Surround PCM track. Unfortunately, there is no AC3. There was no AC3 on the standard Laserdisc, and I think the DVD had AC3, if I'm remembering correctly. But that DVD was also a flipper disc. It was a pretty early Warner's DVD, and you had to flip the DVD about halfway through the film. So that's one of those DVDs that still has a side flip as a holdover from the Laserdisc days. Of course, now you can get the film on Blu-ray, and it's a pretty decent transfer. It's an older master, but of course, I think that one you do get HD 5.1 audio, but of course it's only the theatrical cut and has very limited extras. So hopefully one day they decide to put out this long version again. I hadn't seen this film in a good number of years, but I do think it's quite underrated. It came out up against Tombstone, and from what I remember, there's a lot more thought and fine detail that's put into this. And of course, originally, if I'm understanding and remembering correctly, I think it was Kevin Costner who was trying to get a project about Earp and Tombstone and the gunfight at the OK Corral up off the ground, and it eventually kind of fell apart, and different parties went two different ways, thus resulting in the two different films. And so the writer went off, and his project eventually became Tombstone, and he was the original director before he was removed. And Costner went on with his version, and I think somehow got Lawrence Kasdan involved, and it became the Warner's release Wyatt Earp. So anyway, you get a nice fold-out brochure here, or pamphlet I should say, and really nicely done. You get some of the classic 90s critic quotes over some pretty nice imagery, and this is very well printed. It's not glossy, but it's definitely a nice thick cardstock. Now here you have, very much like T2 and the other James Cameron extended versions on Laserdisc, you have all of the scene extensions and added materials detailed by chapter breakdown, so you can actually see what's been added and go back and reference for yourself if you can't very easily identify from the theatrical cut. And the best part is right here, where you get a full letter from Lawrence Kasdan on one panel, and then this panel is a kind of, I think it's originally from an article. It's sort of I guess it's originally a review. Yeah, it's from the Chicago Tribune, as it says on the bottom, but it's, you know, more of an appreciation of the film. And then here is a letter from Lawrence Kasdan explaining why he wanted to make this longer version available, and the concessions they had to make make the theatrical version cut. And so you know, he just wanted this to be out there for fans of the film, so people could get an idea of more of his original idea and vision for the project. And I really like these. He did a similar one for the reissue of Body Heat, and I think these are some of the best, you know, creative team letter materials or writing pieces that are in Laserdisc, period. And then here you get your chapter breakdowns, and then the cast and crew listing here. And as you can see, the film runs onto 8 sides, so you're going to be flipping quite a lot. And then here you get a little box saying that the film is presented in scope 235, and that letterboxing is normal, and don't be crazy that you have black bars on your screen. Now, let me show you the contents. Of course, it's pretty much disc just in a box, and with the standard Warner Brothers label. The only difference being that the runtime is a lot longer, and it says special expanded version. But other than that, just some discs in a box, and I need to replace these sleeves at some point. They're just standard paper sleeves, but for the insanely low price I paid, I'm not complaining. You do get this really nice book about the making of the film. I guess sort of in the manner of the Dances with Wolves box set has a making of book. It's got a nice glossy cover and some really great photos, script excerpts, and just really, really well printed. And I'm really excited to read through this once I actually get time to sit down for about 4 hours with this box set. But yeah, just really, really nice. Actually, it looks like a lot more script material than I originally thought. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I don't think this book could hold the entire shooting script for this 4-hour version, but I don't know. Maybe they managed to cram it in here. I didn't realize so much script was in here. So yeah, I take that back. This may actually be like most of the script with yeah, so basically this is like pretty much most of the entire shooting script, then peppered with all kinds of making of details and diagrams and photos and things. So that's a really nice way of you know, detailing the film and trying to get at its you know, greater strengths and stuff. So yeah, this is really substantial and extremely well done. And as you could see, you could buy this separate back in the day for $17.99. So, you know, this is an actual legitimate book packaged in here. So that's a really nice touch. I didn't realize it was most of the original screenplay in there. So that's quite nice. So yeah, really, this is not like a super fancy box set. It's just the extreme rarity and the exclusivity of having this long version that makes it important. So I would definitely recommend, if you actually manage to find one of these like I did, even though this one is a little dinged up, I would definitely say go for it, because these things usually go for, you know, well over $50 at least. Sometimes they pop up for $100. They just don't come up, and I'm excited to finally be able to see this longer version and see if it really changes anything or makes the film better or anything, or if it just, you know, helps add to the ambiance or something. Because like I said, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I do think it's kind of undervalued and kind of got lost in the shadow of Tombstone at the same time. So just really happy to find this, and definitely this is the best find I've made locally in years. I just can't believe it was there. So anyway, that's going to do it for this section of videos. Stay tuned for, I've got a couple more coming up, disc videos about a couple different ones that I wanted to do some separate things of. And then, of course, more pickups, and then I've got to get some gear videos done to finally go over some of my basic setup. So thanks again so much for watching, and hope you got your laser fix.